Good day, everyone. This is Lowman02. We're going to do another quick deck tech here, and then we're going to jump into a few games with a deck that I affectionately call Death and Taxes. A lot of folks will call it White Weenie. You'll see it's dual labeled in the actual deck name. I think it's technically a misnomer. This deck specifically is more of a Death and Taxes deck, so it's a disruptive version of the White Weenie. Whereas I see White Weenie being a grow style deck, this is more of a disruptive deck. So you can see we run a lot of creatures. We don't have effects like Crusade or Honor of the Peer or Always Watching in this deck. And where we do on some of our creatures, it is creature based. So as you look down, you'll see cards like Council's Lieutenant that is essentially a Crusade or an Honor of the Peer effect, but at the same time, it's a 2/1 body with first strike that grows itself. Um, I think those cards are great in a very specific style of deck, but I think they often fall short in the matchups that this deck is not generally good against, which would be your control variants that run a lot of Wrath. So if we have a 47 creature deck with multiple man lands that essentially count as creatures as well, what we're really looking to do is shore up the matchups we're bad at. And that's why I really built this specific version of White Weenie, quote unquote, or Death and Taxes, with disruption in mind. All right, so to go over really briefly the mana base, we have all available fetch lands to find planes. We have a Dust Bowl in the main. As this is a disruptive deck, we want to be able to attack the opponent's mana base. An Eggejano Castle. I don't think I can ever say that correctly. Let me pull up the preview window real fast. Sorry about that, folks. Ejano Castle, if you're not familiar, it's a plains, essentially. It is a legendary land, non-basic. You can tap 1 white, prevent 2 damage. Not bad in the burn matchup. Protect some of your legends. Flagstone's a Troikir. This is an Armageddon deck, so Flagstone's a great card in this deck. It is legendary as well, but no one wants to wasteland this thing, because it just means you're going to find another land. Okay, so you have Ghost Quarter as well. So we do have some outs to using Ghost Quarter as a straight-up strip mine on our not Leonin Relic Quarter, but on the other Leonin we have in the deck, if I can find him here in this pile. There we go, Leonin Arbiter. Going down, Horizon Canopy. This is generally a staple in the Legacy style of Death and Taxes. You don't want to hit too many lands with this deck. That's why we're running only 36. This here itself, we'll either give you a white mana if you need it in the early stages of the game, or sack off for a card later on. Caracas, strong utility land, strong spell land, essentially, and it gets after more of the unfair decks. It can also just win you some matches. You'll see when we get to the play. All right, so we have our plains. No one's getting a Blood Moon off on us. Rishadan Port, yeah, I think it's probably the most expensive, unfortunately, card on Magic Online right now. If you're looking for a more budget option of this build, take it out. But it is a strong card, because really what we're looking to do is keep the game in the early parts of the mid game or late parts of the early game when we're playing this deck, and this card allows you to do that. Tech Edge, fine card, more LD. Wasteland, more LD to keep the game in the early stages of the game. Wimbrisk Kites, this is an attacking deck, a 47 creature deck, so we run this in order to get after some of our more big mana spells. If we can get something like a Stone Hewer or a piece of equipment underneath it, or even something as simple as a Flicker Wisp that can blank an opponent during an attack, or one of our Planeswalkers. We're very happy with that. It's free spells, or essentially it takes a spell and makes it cost 2 mana because you're tapping that land plus the planes. Okay, so let's go into the actual deck itself. Mox Diamond has a lot of synergies with one of my favorite cards in the deck, which is Land Tax. Land Tax, I don't commonly see it played in White Weenie decks. I play it here because it's one of the few forms of card advantage you can get out of this deck. Got it. It's not the cards per se you want, but it purifies your draw and makes sure that you're not going to be pulling as many lands off the top of the deck. Another card I don't really commonly see played is Benevolent Bodyguard, and I don't know why. This guy is not Mother of Runes, obviously, but he can have that same effect the turn he comes into play. Summoning Sickness does not stop his ability. And often I found that if you can have this effect one time, you can stop a lot of shenanigans on the opponent's part and protect your early drop creatures. All right, Boros Legion Beater. Brave the Elements. One of the few tricks you'll see in the deck. I think this trick is just that good. It can often just lead to one alpha swing through a variety of different threats the mid-range opponent has played and winning the game. And let me get to some of the ones I think that are odd. So Deathblade Elite. I think this one's a little odd. The reason that I've included this card is because of the provoke clause on it. It also carries equipment just fine. It's a 1/1 for 1. But with provoke on it, when an opponent drops mana birds or birds of paradise, actual card name, or an elf, sometimes it's just better to trade this thing off for that card or straight up kill it if it's birds of paradise. And this allows you to do that. And if you end up ever getting equipment on it, you can just straight up kill better threats with it. Okay, so I have a lot of the tappers in here. You'll see Gideon's Lawkeeper. You'll see the analogous 2-drop Whip Quarter. You see the newer Thalia in here, Heretic Cathar, as well as Imposing Sovereign. I find these effects to be phenomenal, like very, very strong. And I don't think anyone would argue Gideon's Lawkeeper is a bad card. I mean, it's a little innocuous looking, but these cards really give you punch up power against the mid range decks that are out there, and or unfair decks that try to reanimate things. They can reanimate, let's say an Emrakul, and these cards can all have a very positive impact on keeping you alive when something like that comes in. And it's pretty hilarious to me when a 1-drop that is innocuous as this card right here can stop probably the most threatening Eldrazi, maybe the most threatening creature ever printed once it's in play. For essentially 2 mana investment. That's pretty great. So going down, we already talked tax. Mother of Runes, nothing much to talk about on this. Great card. You see, we do play Oust in this deck. We don't play Condemn, but we play the remainder of the 1-drop white removal package with Swords to Plowshares and Path to Exile and Oust. I think Oust is stronger than Condemn in this deck. This is an attacking deck, so typically speaking, the points in time you're going to want removal are in the early game. So Oust itself is dual purpose. One, it clears the board early or mid game, so you can continue to get threats through. Because typically speaking, the 3 life gain is not going to equate to what the opponent's losing, which is their ability to block with a larger threat than most of the stuff we're playing, and probably kill one of our threats. Not to mention, it forces them to replay it 3 turns later. The best case for Oust is that it hits a mana dork, turn 1 or turn 2, and then they're forced to draw that card, turn 4, 5, 6 of the game. When it really has lost its utility and ramping them in the early part of the game. All right, so this is an equipment-based deck. Just to make some of these, for lack of a better term, crude creatures, actual real threats. So Steel Shaper's Gift is a phenomenal card in here. We run 3 equipment inside the deck, 1 sideboard, with Bone Splitter essentially acting as a 2-power haste creature, and then the Sword of Feast of Famine, and then Sophie, Sword of Fire and Ice. All pretty good in the meta that we currently have, and really the strongest swords that are out there. That can get it for you. Generally, you're looking to do that turn 3 or turn 4. All right, Weather Wayfarer, just spend a quick moment on this card right here, because I see a lot of decks play white and not play this card. Some do, but I think this is, in order of precedence, I think the strongest 1-drops that this deck has is Mother of Runes, Land Tax, and then this card. Those are the best 1-drops easily in this deck. This card right here can do a lot for you. You'd think in a fast deck like this, you'd want to invest more time and mana into putting your creatures in play. If you can drop this turn 1, especially on the draw, it can allow you to get rid of critical pieces of mana fixing and or utility lands, because you're going to be able to, essentially wasteland them for at least 3 turns off of the mana package that we have with Dust Bowl, Tech Edge, Wasteland, and Ghost Quarter. Which really adds up on decks that are reliant on all of their lands to produce mana, whereas this deck is not. It gets 2 to 3 planes in play, and generally it's going to win the game. As you can see, our curve is very, very low. So if we can forestall the opponent from developing their game plan with our land via this card, we can keep them in the earlier stages of the game where this deck really shines. So I think it's a strong card, and I think, if you are playing white, it's definitely worth a strong consideration, because I think it's a very, very strong card, especially if you're playing valuable lands that have utility just outside of mana. Okay, so jump into the 2 spots. I'll talk the important ones. All right, Containment Priest. So I play this card main, and I think it's phenomenal main, mostly because there's natural orders running around, there's birthing pods running around, there's show and tell to a lesser extent, reanimator builds this can get. But it also has some internal strategies with the deck. So this card, has some internal synergy with Flicker Wisp, which can essentially equate to Flicker Wisp being a 3/1 body flying that says Swords to Plowshares on it without the life gain. Banisher Priest, additional 1. So, typically, cards like Banisher Priest can be riskier. This deck used to run all three of them, the new dwarf one, and then the 1/3 that has um, some synergies with the stack, and then this one right here. We got rid of two of them because they just weren't viable or good enough threats for this deck. The 2/2 body on this is what really sold me on this one. But one of the risks you run with cards like this is that it gets removed, at instant speed, and you're in the middle of an attack step, and suddenly you're attacking into a Gristlebrand or whatever. And what I found is Containment Priest main with some of these synergies is phenomenal because they kill this thing instant speed, thinking they're gonna get something back, and nope, Containment Priest is in play or I have it in hand. So strong synergies with that card. I think it's good against a lot of different power cards in the field. All right, Declaration Stone, a little more questionable, but 2 mana, unconditional removal, works on tokens. It's fine. Imposing Sovereign, another one that I don't see a lot of. I think this card is great. It's also one of the few creatures that is only a subtype human with no other sort of description to it, which is kind of entertaining and odd. But this effect was essentially replicated on Thalia Heretic Athar. Obviously, additional proviso that it does the same thing to artifacts and to non-basic lands. And that card is an all-star, from vintage all the way, up until standard. This card only does a portion of that, albeit, but it's 1 mana less. It's 2/1, and the effect really allows you to punch up against mid-range opponents, and it's very strong. All right, Jotun Grunt. I don't see this guy a lot either. He used to be an all-star. I think he's fine though. Like you look at cards like Tarmogoyf, which is a threat that a mid-range deck or 3-color value deck could play against you early, and scales up very well, like favorably for whoever's playing the Tarmogoyf against your creatures. And this card, one, scales very well with the Tarmogoyf and also shrinks it on each turn. You're not going to have the guy forever, but in this deck, you don't really need your creatures forever. You need them probably for 2 to 3 turns. And I think what you can generally expect with this guy right here, depending on when you draw him, is to get 2 turns worth of attacks out of him, which is good enough on a 4/4 body for 2 mana. All right, Journey to Nowhere, another synergy with Containment Priest if this somehow gets removed, but just very efficient removal, and you want that in a deck like this to keep the board open early. Core Skyfisher, great card in this deck. So as we said, we are a land tax deck. And land tax itself synergizes with this card, with Mox Diamond, and with a couple other cards inside the build. So 2/3 body for 2 mana. Putting something back into my hand is, that's generally favorable. And sometimes it even makes mana. If you're stuck on 2 and you play this guy and drop a plains back into your hand, replay it, and then play an additional 1-drop that's been trapped in your hand just because you couldn't get it out in time. It's phenomenal. All right, Arbiter. Yep, we play him, and we kind of talked about the reasons why. All right, Relic Seeker. So in 100 Card Singleton, obviously, Stoneforge Mystic is currently banned. So is Umezawa's Jitte, both of which cards would be in this deck if they could be. But this guy is a suitable replacement. He's an adequate replacement, really, for Stoneforge Mystic. Definitely not the same card. But what you do get for the same amount of mana is generally a bigger body after he's hit once, and you get to go ahead and find one of your artifacts. So he kind of complements the package we were talking about in the beginning with the Steel Shaper's Gift. All right, Selfless Spirit. Selfless Spirit. Great card. So this card, as soon as I saw it, I knew it was an auto add to this deck. This deck needs protection against wraths, and this card right here does it. So it's definitely a get in there kind of card. Plus it flies, 2/1 body, very efficient. So good card. Spirit of Labyrinth, a little more questionable, but the 3/1, it's a very powerful attacker. And against some decks, it can just stop a lot of shenanigans. All right, Thalia. Forces Wraths to come down a turn later, and just really an efficient, good creature. And also stops a lot of decks in their tracks. All right, Lieutenant, just a great card for this deck. And also, one synergy to note with stuff like Thalia's Lieutenant, and then when we get down to it, Anafenza, the Kindry Spirit, is that these cards really do help fight against cards like Humility. So this deck, ostensibly does not look very good against Humility, but because some of the the counter generators in the deck that we have, we're able to fight around that card very well. And I think you'll see that in one of the matches we end up playing, where an opponent had a choice where they could have gotten Humility, but it just wasn't a viable play because the creatures, were pretty much worse than the +1/+1 counters on them at that point in time. All right, so going down, we talk Consul's Lieutenant. Very efficient. Not a lot of his synergies as far as being a hate bearer, but because it's a 2/1 first strike for 2 mana, becomes a 3/2 first strike, after it hits, and gives everything else +1/+1 on the attack. It's just too efficient to forego. Our 8.5 tails. This is an Armageddon deck, so oftentimes we don't get to a lot of mana. But this is like an additional Mother of Runes, a less, albeit good, Mother of Runes, unless you're on like 20 mana. But very strong card. I've enjoyed having this one on the team. All right, now to the White Orchid. Again, like we said, we're looking to, come from behind on mana. This card does it all. It gets an additional land in play rapidly, can ramp you up to 4 mana on turn 3 when you play it. So, great card. Okay, so, Leon and Relic Order. I think it's good to have a way to answer enchantments, artifacts, main. This is one of our few ways that we have the ability to do so, and there's a lot more on the board once we get there. All right, Precinct Captain, just an efficient threat. Same with Avenger, just an efficient threat. Whip Quarter, again, these tappers, I think they're worth their weight in gold, so get in there. Smuggler's Copter, recent addition to this deck, and I found it to be great. Like we said, we need a lot of protection against Wrath. The filtration effect on this thing for looting is awesome. But more so than that even is the fact that, this thing doesn't get killed by Wrath, and when I play a 1/1 the following turn, let's say it sends Tactician, I can get him for 3 damage post-Wrath and filter through any dead cards in my hand, like extra lands, etc. All right, Porcelain Legionnaire, good beater. Even Mind Sensor, strong card. This is obviously a Death and Taxes card. It stops search effects, which can be good against a wider array of decks. Thalia, Heretic Cathar. This 3-drop right here is definitely the 3-drop that could. I think when a lot of folks first looked at this card, they weren't as impressed by it. But in this format, there's a lot of decks that have fairly greedy mana bases, are trying to do more powerful things than this deck is. And this card really just says, hey, nope, you're not doing it. Or you're going to do it 1 to 2 turns later than you expected to do it, which gives this deck enough time to close the door on decks that play like that. All right, Banisher Priest. We already talked this card. It's a fine removal spell. Fine removal spell on a stick, and it's 2/2 body. So get in there. It's a fine card. Brimaz, just a beater. Good at it, but just a beater. Flicker Wisp. Some internal strategies can get rid of a crucial blocker on a crucial turn to attack in for lethal. Plus it flies, so it gets around moat, stuff like that. As you see, if we can have a flyer, we try to put flyers in the deck because moat can get decks that are oftentimes built, or White Weenie decks or Death and Taxes decks that are not built with some flyers built in. Hallowed Spirit Keeper. I think this is from the last Commander edition. Great card in this deck. This is another wrath-proofing card. And oftentimes, it forces opponents to use some of their most powerful removal that exiles, as opposed to sweeping in the entirety of a board, because you can get, looking at 47 creatures in the deck, you can get, I think the most I've gotten was 11 spirits off this thing, which, if that's not enough to close out a game, you weren't going to win. It wasn't possible to win. Mirroring Crusader, kind of a hedge bet, but this creature is just so efficient and so good. Green is generally a problem for this deck, so I aligned with I put this card in just basically because I knew that if I was playing a mono green opponent, which was at the time I ran this deck, you'll see I played 2 matchups against it. A card like this just shines, and then obviously it's nice to have protection from black because it's a common removal suite that black players will play. Double Strike, obviously just a beating. When you put equipment on them, it's generally just game over. It pulls curtains fast. Same thing with Silverblade, just a great beater. Can just come out of nowhere and smash an opponent to 0 life very rapidly. Boros Reckoner, I played this deck twice in tournament play. This guy was added afterwards. He is just a beater, but he is one of the best at it. And the cool thing about this card is really that it can play both offense and defense extremely well. No one wants to hit this thing because it's just not going to end well. I mean, it takes out 6/6s. A Primeval Titan can attack this thing and it'll die in the exchange. Obviously, this will too, but that's a 3-mana investment versus a 6-mana investment, or at least a 4-mana plus mana dork for a natural order. So equipment package, nothing out of the ordinary here. We have a lot of ways to find these guys, and they're very good at shoring up your mid-range matchup, which is your toughest. All right, as I said, we are a Geddon deck. So the Geddons and a lot of the tax component of the Death and Taxes really are what give this deck the ability to beat control decks. And as you'll see, it comes into play. Now, we don't get to ravage any of the control players we end up playing, but the taxing effects of the cards and the disruptive nature of the cards would allow you to really get ahead against control. Because they oftentimes play a lot of spells, play a lot of cards that, are cards that we've kind of looked over briefly, hate out. Elspeth, just too good not to include. It's 4 mana, but this thing just wins games on its own. Gideon, similar thing. I oftentimes find I cut this card against decks that play counter spells because it doesn't do as much as Elspeth does. You can be in game states where the anthem effect is nice, but I've found that it's not as powerful as Elspeth. So if I'm playing a match with a lot of counter spells and I want to get my curve down lower, I tend to bring in one of the 2 drops from the board and take this guy out, or I'll put in Griff's Boon or Disenchants or Black Vices and take this guy out. So I have more low flying threats that don't get countered as easily, or I can play like 2 to 3 spells in a turn and force them to make possibly the wrong decision about which of them to counter, as opposed to playing one spell that they can counter and then it's back to their turn. Hero Bladehold, only 4-drop creature we run in the deck. It's just too good to ignore. This card wins games, in a turn, essentially. If you get to untap with this card, you're probably winning. It's really what it comes down to. It's essentially the Hero of Oxid Ridge and or Hell Rider of Mono White. All right, so Stonehewer Giant. This is the only 5-drop that we run in the deck outside of the board, which has an additional 5-drop in Tragic Arrogance for the mid-range matchup. But this card is the third piece of our equipment search capability. The fact that it has Vigilance and already is on a 4/4 body, plus can attach it to any creature that you control, makes it a very powerful card. So, you typically activate this thing in the middle of an attack, and it puts a sword, or I guess a Bone Splitter, but generally a sword, on whatever threat you want. As you see, that comes up and it becomes very relevant in one of the matchups we end up playing. All right, so board, Gripspoon, recent ad that I put into the board. Gripspoon is just great against cards like Humility and like Moat, and or decks that run a higher volume of flyers. All right, Disenchant, this card was put in with Humility and Moat directly in mind, because cards like Humility would prevent our main board option, which is Leonin Relic Hoarder, from getting it. And or, a Batter Skull, something like that. It just gives you additional reach against those kind of cards. Hollow Moonlight, this is good against Natural Order decks, good against Reanimator decks, good against Pod decks, Show and Tell, you name it. It's a strong sideboard card. White has strong hate against a lot of stuff, a lot of shenanigans. Kataki, have yet to sideboard this guy in. He maybe should come out, but he's a powerful effect, and if there was, let's say an Artifact Prison style deck, this can turn the corner on them pretty quick, or force them to commit their mana to something that they don't intend to commit it to. Rest in Peace, just a very flexible and powerful card. This is really in here for the Reanimator matchup, which is only like 1 or 2 players that I've seen play this deck, but because of this effect, because of how powerful this is and how much it just turns off their ability to win, it's worth the ad. War Priest of Thune, another card that we added really just to get after problem enchantments, like Phyrexian Arenas, or cards like that. It's just a flexible card for that, and we gave it the nod and added it in. I think previously you had cards like Ronan Unicorn, which would require you to sacrifice them, or the Kami of Ancient Law, and this card just beats both of those out because it's just an ETB, and you get to keep the 2/2 body on it. Keep in mind, it doesn't have the flexibility, however, to wait or to invest in the card. So I guess what I mean by that is you can't play this card and then hope to later hit something that comes down. All right, Warmth, great in the mono-red matchup. There's not much to be said there. Grand Abolisher, great against control. Not much to be said on that. Core Firewalker, mono-red, just beats it. Samurai the Pale Curtain, again, another Reanimator hedge card right here. Crackdown, good in the mid-range. Green creatures are normally going to be bigger than ours. We play this, and they're not going to be untapped. So it's essentially a Meek Stone that only impacts other people's cards, not our own. Tragic Arrogance, I really added this just to beat up on mid-range. So with the idea being, we would cast this thing, keep, a Hero of Bladeholder, or Stonehewer, or even just a, Howled Spirit Keeper or a Mirroring Crusader, and force them to keep, like a Mana Elf or something like that. Sort of Light and Shadow. This is just good in against control because it allows us to recur our own creatures. It's not bad against red deck wins as well because of the life gain. But really, it's in there so that we can get our creatures back. And there are some mono white players, so in that context, it's good as well. Winter Roar, just great against control. Don't play a main because we tend to use our mana very heavily as well. But if we're playing against a deck that is is playing more powerful spells, but is required to tap down or has to tap more mana to play each powerful spell, and does not have powerful lower curve threats. And this is just a great card because I mean we can play this and yeah, they may get off their one big punch, but they're not going to get off another one after that. And if you look at across the curve of this deck, I mean it's very streamlined. If we can just untap one land, I mean we're playing another threat at that point in time. All right, Black Vice just wins against control. I mean, they can't handle this. If you play this turn one, the game is pretty much over for them. Getting to have a lightning bolt every single turn for the first 4 or 5 turns is great, and or forcing them to prematurely commit cards that they could use to better effect later. So that covers the deck tech. We'll jump into the matches at this point in time. Our first game is against Yokai, who's on mono green. Okay, so as you can see, we keep a one-lander, 36 land deck. We're not too worried about it. I mean, I guess worst case, we could path to exile our own guy. But we have a 2/1 that we're going to play Dragon Hunter first turn. Without the knowledge of a second land, we'll keep the Figure of Destiny in hand. Leonin Arbiter is fine. If we do manage to get our second land, it makes Path to Exile that much better. It makes it, essentially an improved version of Swords to Plowshares. We know we have Thalia's Lieutenant, which will pump up the Dragon Hunter and also the Knight of the White Orchid. And we know if we find that second land and the opponent, which we're assuming is on mono green, so he's played it for the last couple of tournaments, ramps, then we could even, as short as turn 2, end up playing the Knight of the White Orchid and ramping ourselves up to a third land. So let's play it. Play our land, play our Hunter, pass it back over. And we have Elves of Deep Shadow. So we do hit our second land at this point in time. What we opt to do is go with the Figure of Destiny, leaving the option open to either pump it to a 2/2 and or leave Path to Exile open. And we're intending fully on the following turn of casting Knight of the White Orchid. So if the opponent is for some reason on a mana shorthand, we'll use the Path to Exile to ramp them and then ramp ourselves. Okay, so what we see here is what we end up seeing here is a Corsair Crew fix. We end up path exiling this card, and it may seem premature, but what I'm thinking in my head is I see the Garrick on top of his library, and that's the last card I really want to see at this phase in the game because he does have the ability to cast it at this point, and that card could just wreck us. So I force him to make the decision between grabbing a land off the path to exile and or keeping the Garrick on top of his deck. Plus, I also don't want to see that kind of life gain. And a 2/4 is a very efficient and decent sized body, is a good blocker against what we've got going on right now. He ends up taking the land, which I am very happy that he does. So we get our Knight of the White Orchid down, ramp ourselves 1 mana, pump our Figure, and get in for 4. Okay, so we see Oracle come down, a bunch of lands off the top. Oracle, very powerful, but it's an investment card. It's not going to win him the game this turn. It doesn't put a sizable body in play to really stop what I've got going on. So if we're looking at our hand, our plan at this point is to play on our Thalia next turn, because the biggest fear that we have at this point in time is we're not far from winning this game, but if the opponent was to get a natural order in play, let's say a Hornet Queen or something like that, our entire game plan has just, gotten the kibosh put on it. Plus, there's a lot of life gain available in green, so I want to keep him as low as possible, and as much as I can, stop him from acquiring sizable blockers that can stop, my 2/2s and 2/1s and 3/2s from getting through for more damage. So what you'll see is we pick up the Sword of Feast and Famine. We are not going to play that. It's a great card, and it pretty much blanks it blanks all the cards in his deck. Outside of he has ways of dealing with it, obviously, because he's in green, but he's not going to block anything that's got that thing attached to it. But on 3 mana, it's essentially a rock this turn. So we're going to end up playing out the Thalia, Heretics, Cathar after we go in for the attack. We want to leave the option for him to trade the Oracle because, we'd rather get the damage in it's still, a 10 times better card than anything that we've got on the board right now. Plus, we want to leave open the 4 mana so we can threaten the pump on Figure of Destiny, but we have no intentions of pumping that thing. If he blocks it, we'll just let it trade. He takes it, and we play out the Thalia. And at this point, we pretty much know, like, outside of, like, really, like, odd cards, like, I can't think of Beast Within, and cards like that, or like Song of the Dryads. Like, green does not have a lot of good answers, to this board state. So we're feeling very confident that we've locked this game up. And as you'll see, our worries about natural order were actually very well justified. So we see a natural order get cast on the Elves of Deep Shadow and a Hornet Queen come into play. And, although that is a great play against a mono white weenie deck, it can't do it here because it's all going to come into play tapped. And it wouldn't matter if it was the Woodfall Primus itself. Like, any green card is going to come into play that tapped. I mean, it could have been Progenitus, which has protection from every single thing, but that's still coming into play tapped. So as you see, like, the power of a Thalia Heretic Cathar right here, allowing us to get the win. The opponent could block on the following turn, ostensibly on the Thalia Heretic Cathar, but he's still taking 6 with a possible threat of pump on the Figure of Destiny, up to 4. So, that's game 1. We'll go to game 2 at this point in time. Okay, so not a very, very different draw. But I'll tell you why I keep it. So I have my early threat, my Ismaru, which, I'm thinking in my head it's probably going to be able to get in maybe once, maybe twice, tops. But what this hand does have is it has the ability through the Aven Mind Sensor to stop shenanigans, like, Primeval Titan searching for lands, Natural Order, Eldritch Evolution, tutor effects. So green has a lot of great critter selection available to it. So I'm thinking, hey, I've got a decent early gameplay in Ismaru. I've got the ability to disrupt their ability to find decent critters with any of their tutors, because they're essentially, a green stompy or green ramp deck essentially. And then I also have Stonehewer. I have 4 lands in hand, which is very heavy for this deck, being a 36 land deck. But Stonehewer, you know, in my opinion, is able to win this match almost on its own because of the swords. Because I'm able to get swords with it at essentially instant speed and put it on whatever threat I want, I know that if I can get to 5 mana and cast this guy, I'm pretty sure I can win the game. Okay, so we see Elves first turn. Not a great first turn play to see out of the opponent because we know that they're going to be playing at a minimum of 3 mana spell, and it's probably going to be bigger than our Ismaru. We do draw the Sword of Feast and Famine, which is kind of a best worst. We'd rather probably honestly just stay in deck so that we can get it with the Stonehewer once we get to our 5 mana spot. I would see a Fierce Empath at this point in time. Opponent pulls out a Wormcoil Engine, which is definitely very threatening. But what you'll find is the opponent actually had a very mana-choked hand. So Leatherback Baloth, just huge. Just a big guy. 4/5. Can't block it, can't attack into it. Rex Sage comes out. We lose our sword. So it's not looking good for us right now. But, I'm still pretty hopeful that if I can get this Stonehewer into play, I'll have the ability to turn the corner on this, especially if, we manage to get lucky and he continues to miss land based on a greedy keep. So we take 4 down to 16. Play the Benevolent Bodyguard. Like I said in the very short deck, this card's worth its weight in gold. You will see a misplay here in a minute when he attacks in, and I'll highlight what happened there. All right, so I go for the block on the Rex Age. Hey, folks, go ahead and put the Benevolent Bodyguard on the non-trampling Baloth. For some reason in my head, because of the size of this thing, and it's green, I thought it had trample, so I didn't bother. Benevolent Bodyguard should have blocked the Leatherback Baloth, then been sacrificed to keep the Ismaru around. Keep in mind, we want to keep the Ismaru around because it's an additional body that we're thinking in our heads we're going to want later due to having the Stonehewer Giant. So I want to keep this guy around. And then you'll see an Aven Mind Sensor come out end of turn. So we took an additional 4 damage we did not need to take whatsoever there. But we get Aven Mind Sensor down on the battlefield. We draw an Elspeth at this point, but Stonehewer is our first priority. We keep the Tech Edge in play. They're not playing a lot of non-basics. Plus, we're not going to have the ability to use it this turn, and we don't want it to get wastelanded because once we get Stonehewer in play, our ideal draw at this point is really, or correction, we don't want to get wastelanded because we want to have 6 mana next turn Ideally, we're playing the Elspeth next turn and leaving open 2 mana so that we can activate the Stonehewer. And that's kind of what we're thinking through. So Stonehewer comes down. We get a strike in with the 2/1 flyer because we're definitely not blocking with it. Okay, so opponent is completely choked on mana. Plays Nissa Vastwood Seer. We're crossing our fingers right now that Aven Mind Sensor is going to do its job and hopefully keep him from finding a land. But I believe he does. Yes, yeah, he finds his land. All right, Baloth comes in. We take the 4. We're not blocking that thing. Stonehewer is too valuable. Okay, so at this point, I do what we say. I end up doing what we said before. We play Elspeth out, and we leave our 2 mana open. Now, with Elspeth, what we could have done is pumped the Giant or the East Maru and gone over the top. But right now, we're looking for his blockers, so we end up making ourselves a 1/1. Okay, and here you'll see the Power Stone here. So this does not need to go on the Stonehewer. When the Sophie comes into play, we attach to Bird. And what our thinking is we want Sophie because, one, it's going to allow us to get up on cards, and two, it's going to allow us to start bolting, his mana dorks because we know he's on a mana constrained hand. So we end up, I believe, hitting Elvish Mystic with the 2 damage portion of that. Put our 1/1 into play with Elspeth to block the Baloth. Okay, we see a Pelucranos come out, but because of how choked the opponent is on mana, he can't answer anything relevant this turn. And we end up giving the Stonehewer +3/+3 and flying, and attack in for, as you can tell, lethal damage at this point. And for lulls, we end up searching for the Bone Splitter and hitting the opponent for a couple extra damage. So, fun game. As you can see, like the power of a card like Stonehewer. I mean, any tutor in this format is great. But Stonehewer itself, the reason we've included it as the 1/5 drop is because it is that good against other mid-range decks or other, like a ramp or mid-range strategy like the opponent's playing. Its ability to find protection from what they're doing, as well as, find cards that have, extremely synergistic and detrimental effects to them is great in this deck. And it's essentially a much worse version of Stoneforge Mystic, but it's what we got in the format. And being fair, it's probably all we should have because Stoneforge is a ridiculous card. I think this is a ridiculous card, and Stoneforge is just that much better. So we end up knocking out the green ramp deck, piloted by Yokai, and we continue on to an additional green matchup against Saknelis. And we know he's on green. He's part of TBG, and they've been on mono green for a couple weeks in this format. He's Sack Tribe Elder, so not going to be a mana issue over there for him. We play our Council's Lieutenant, hoping to get in at least once with it so that we can pump it. At this point in time, Ancient Tomb is in play. We know we can't attack in with it because he'll pump his card to a 4/3, which would blank ours and kill it. He ends up going for a Primeval Command on Sword of Feast and Famine. But as opposed to getting rid of the sword, ends up finding a Primeval Titan with the other half of that card. At this point in time, we end up playing out our Thalia, Heretic Cathar, and then our Student of Warfare because we want to develop our board. And we really don't care if prime time comes down because we're not looking to stick around for a long time. We're looking to win fast. It's just as long as it comes into play tapped. You'll note that he doesn't have enough mana available to him to activate the Tireless Tracker yet again. So what you'll see here is we get lucky and sack a land off the top of Rishport. We equip our sword to our weakest creature and then end up attacking in. He's forced to block at this point in time because we have lethal on board, discarding an additional card, opening our mana back up, and allowing us to play the Boros Reckoner, which essentially blanks out his Primeval Titan. As you'll see, he has the DD combo, Dark Depths combo. What we force him to do, what we want to do why we do it before his draw step, is we Rishadan Port down his Thespian stage, so that if he wants to make make a Merit Lage, he has to commit to the mana before he draws a card. He obviously has 5 virtual cards waiting for him as well. But we're at a point in the game where his mana really doesn't matter. We just want to, well, his mana does matter, but we want to tie it up as much as possible. Any creature he plays is going to come into play tapped, and that includes the Merit Lage token. Even if it didn't at this point in time, it is black, and we would be able to get through with a pumped up Student of Warfare and get the win. You'll see Prime Time. He can't even attack profitably at this point. If it attacks in, the Boros Reckoner blocks. It kills the Reckoner. It gets 3 damage into us, gets 2 lands, but also dies. And frankly, we probably wouldn't even block it if he attacked. We'd probably just hold it back and wait to attack with it because it really can't be blocked. Even if Meryl Age wants to block it, that's 3 damage to the face. So you can really see it got underneath the power of his curve, and was able to beat him. Even accepting the Dark Depths combo being in play and a Primeval Titan being in play. And really, again, I kind of go back, and I think this card, more than anything, the Thalia Heretic Cathar, did a lot of work for us this tournament. I'm a believer, most certainly in the card. So let's go to the second match. Okay, so we have Mox Diamond Hand, which is awesome because it's rather land heavy, and we see an Armageddon off the top, which is a phenomenal rip. We end up going with Selfless Spirit. We see a Homeward Path. Don't know why that would still be in the deck. Wasteland, just to keep him down on mana. End up playing out the Relic Order. Kind of lamenting it after we play it out, but we wanted to get a threat in play because we see the Utopia Sprawl. But we need to start getting after the opponent's life total. But what it's looking like right now is that the opponent's on a big mana dead end draw, which is good for us because we will step all over that with this kind of deck because we only really have threats available to us. So we get Thalia in play again, and again it's disrupting the opponent. Get him down to 6. Play the Relic Seeker, and at this point in time, he doesn't draw anything useful off the top, and even if he did, it would be tapped. Has a 1/3 to block, and if he blocks the most high power or the highest power creature we have, which is Thalia, he'll essentially cash in his Tree Folk, and we'll get in for 6 and still win the game. So that's kind of the power of this deck's curve, and that's essentially what the deck does. Is if your deck, you're playing this deck and you stumble, whether it's stumbling on getting mana or stumble on getting threats. The deck will run you over, and it's extremely consistent at doing that. So let's go on to the next match. I believe it is against ML Berlin. So we have a white deck versus white deck match. However, I think this one is slightly advantaged. His deck is more of a mid-range build. This is more of an aggressive build. You see one of our Grow cards, Champion of the Parish there. We end up playing out the Porcelain Legionnaire turn 2. See Selfless Servant, or Selfless Spirit on turn 2 for him. We'll attack into it. If he wants to trade for the champion, we're fine with that. We are very happy to see Bremaz come down because we're sacking the Caracas in hand. We didn't play our land so we could get land tax value because we don't have a high mana cost threat density in our hand. So, if we hadn't drawn that Seeker off the top, we would have ended up going for the Selfless Spirit. I think probably misplaying his party ends up playing out Thalia Heretic Cathar, which does nothing here. We strike in, get him down to 3, pull out, I believe, a Bone Splitter, and then upon passing the turn, he concedes the game. All right, game 2. Okay, good hand here. We have a Champion of the Parish, which will grow based upon the cards we have available to us. We play it out first, and then we have options available to us in the second turn. We go with the Thalia, Guardian of Thraben. Don't know how high the creature count is in his deck. It looks like it's decently high. When you see someone play Mother of Runes and Kitchen Finks, it generally means so. Play out the Imposing Sovereign to tap down any other creatures he may play, as well as a Mardu War Reaper, so we can pump up the Champion of the Parish to a 4/4. As you'll see, this champion gets huge this game. I forget how big it gets, but I think it's like 7/7 or 8/8 by the end of it. All right, we get our Sword of Light and Shadow, which we sideboarded in. Great card here. Very happy to see it. Play out the Hallowed Spirit Keeper. He plays on a Sophie at this point in time. So we're happy to see Hallowed Spirit Keeper because we're expecting with a Mother of Runes, a Sophie, and a Kitchen Finks with a Basilisk Collar on it. We're going to be trading a lot of cards, a lot of creature cards. So he does something very interesting here. He taps his Mother of Runes to get in the damage. I'm very happy with this exchange. It means he can't block my creatures. And frankly, I just think my creatures are better. I have more. I think I can do more damage. Sophie triggers, end up getting nothing back that turn. Now, obviously, we're sacking the Containment Priest in hand. And we get another very fortunate turn of events here. He attacks with the Mother of Runes. Folks, honestly, I think I have attacked with a Mother of Runes before. I can't remember doing it, but I will almost promise you it was never right. Maybe there's a situation where it is. This still isn't it. I'm on white, and there are actually quite a few flash creatures in white. Not all of them are playable. But why take the risk? This attack doesn't even win the game for him. So I think you need to leave back that Mother of Runes just to at least blank out one of my attackers if need be. But as you'll see, Containment Priest comes into play. We trade for his Mother of Runes, which I am more than happy to do, especially with Lord of Sword of Light and Shadow in play. I'm able to get the thing back next turn. No further plays out of ML. We play the Quarter Paladin. I end up alpha striking with the team that's available for the attack. After attack, get back our Containment Priest, re-equip Sword to a Quarter Paladin to provide protection against Kitchen Finks and to stop the life gain off the Basilisk Collar. He's unable to do anything with it. I consider briefly playing my Containment Priest, and then I think, what the heck am I doing? Attack in. We see Restoration Angel played here. I'm more than happy to see this. I end up playing my Containment Priest. He exiles his own Kitchen Finks to no gain, and we attack in for exactly lethal. And that's game. All right, so our last game against the matchup that we really want to face with this deck. I mean, we want to get control. We're against Michelle Wong here, and she is on Azorius control, as she typically is. Decent hand here. 2-lander, fine with that. It's a low curve deck. We do have some of our larger threats in hand, but I see a Benevolent Bodyguard, which will protect me against any early critter kill. And, it's just generally a good card. Playing out the Whip Quarter. She STPs my 1-drop, which I'm happy with. I'm fine with that. Attack in for 2. I believe, we end up playing out the Selfless Spirit, and she repulses our Whip Quarter at this point in time. Yep. So she repulses our Whip Quarter. We don't have any more mana, so that kind of stinks, but we've still got a 2-1 body in play. In this 2-1 at least, I'm glad that our first card got Swords to Plowshare, had to be, really, because it would have given protection to better cards. Because this card really gives us a lot of, gives us more miles out of our cards against cards like Wrath of God. Really, the only good answers to it are like Hallowed Burial or Terminus. Anything that is essentially a bottom Wrath, a bottom of the deck Wrath. Searcast Gush, too easy. I'm glad to see that. She can draw as many cards as she wants as long as she's not interacting with my plan. It's kind of how you got to think when you're playing this deck. So we see a Trinket Mage come into play. That's going to serve as a blocker, but in our hand we do have the Thalia's Lieutenant. We draw our land, play on our Gideon's Lawkeeper, pump the team, ends up having to chump with her Trinket Mage. We see a Faith Fetters come into play. It stops our Whip Quarter, and then we see... So this is an interesting part of the game. So I'm very curious here as to what's going on. I see that she's played a Pithing Needle on Gideon's Lawkeeper, and she has Faith Fettered my Whip Quarter. I would have expected her to Faith Fetter the Selfless Spirit. Now, I mean, given that would have allowed me to get in for a lot of damage and to fog the life gain effect because I would have sacrificed it in response. But it would have set up a Wrath in the following turn. So I'm very curious about this. So what I'm thinking in my head is she must have a large creature that she's trying to get down to block with. Because if you play a Pithing Needle, which is a very powerful card, and you don't name Selfless Spirit, then you obviously don't have Wrath in hand. And, you must have something large like, a Consecrated Sphinx or something like that. So it must be very important that whatever you're playing, needs to come into play untapped. So play Imposing Sovereign out as opposed to a card like Mirroring Crusader. Plus, I'm not unhappy with that. I get to hold up Brave the Elements for any, one-on-one removal that she may play. And here we get to see what she was holding, and it's just a big old Eternal Dragon, just a big old 5/5 flyer. Comes into play tapped, can do nothing to stop us from winning right now, and we Alpha Strike in for the lethal and put her to -2. Okay, next game. Okay, so good strong keep here. We're happy to see Benevolent Bodyguard. We're happy to have a turn 2 play like Thalia or Precinct Captain. I believe we go with Precinct Captain here. As we'll really conserve the Thalia for turn... Or correction, we do play Thalia. Typically, you don't have to play Thalia here. I think you want Thalia by turn 3 or 4. I think what I probably thought was, hey, if she's got card draw or any 2-3 mana spells that draw cards, let's make her pay extra for it. See Naven Mindsters are coming to play. Again, 3 mana trading for 1 mana. I'm fine with that. End up playing 2 more threats, a Boros Elite and Precinct Captain, so we have a lot of damage on board. And with that Selfless Spirit that we have in hand, we know that she's not going to be able to Wrath. So I think post-game, I ended up talking to her about this. The Thalia ended up being an all-star because it forced her, it disabled her from being able to play Wrath on turn 4. The Selfless Spirit was just a monumental beating when I ended up playing it turn 4 because once she hit that 5th land, her Wrath was essentially a blank. Um, I think what you'll see here is she ends up playing an Elspeth out to try to block, but either she didn't do the math or she's just playing it out for lulls at this point because it's not enough. She's going to die regardless. She blocks the Boros Elite, which is a 3/3, and then that's enough to put her to 0. Exactly. So, very good set of games, very powerful deck. It may not seem like that just looking at the cards themselves or looking at at some of the cards that are in there because I mean, like I even said, some of the creatures are just kind of like crappy beaters. Um, but the deck is very, very explosive. Very capable of getting explosive, and it disrupts on a lot of different levels. Plus, it has great sideboard tech against a lot of the like a lot of archetypes that you would think would generally beat this style of deck. Like Reanimator, etc. It's good against control due to the disruption that it packs in it, and I think it's just generally better to go with a hate bear or a creature heavy strategy as opposed to like a grow strategy. What I mean grow is like cards like we mentioned the deck tech like Always Watching or Crusade or any of those effects. Um, they're fine, and they will tend to shore up mid range games. But I think in the matchups that we won, we generally won because of the effects that our creatures had on the opponent, and our ability to go wide against the opponent, which you really saw shine against like the green players. In addition to that, I mean, also the equipment package helps out a lot. In this matchup, in the control matchup, it's not as relevant. But when you're facing mid range, which is generally going to be a bad matchup for little 2/2 creatures, those cards can tend to end games if they're unable to deal with them. So I hope you enjoyed the deck tech. Definitely a very powerful deck. Actually, the only deck I've ever run that won every single game that it played in every match for a whole tourney. But that's not to say anything. I mean, it's probably just favorable matchups and just getting lucky. But very good deck. I recommend it to anyone who wants to play like a good entry level deck. It's not an extremely skill intensive deck. I mean, there is some sequencing that goes into it, but definitely fun to play if you like turning them sideways. And I'd recommend, if you can build this deck almost similar to the one I've got here. I've spent a lot of years. This is probably the oldest deck I have in the Singleton format. It was one of the first that I built, and I put a lot of time into keeping it updated. And I think it's a very well tuned deck against a lot of what goes on in the field. So I'd highly recommend it. I think it's a great deck, very fun to play, and I hope you enjoyed the deck tech and the video series on Death and Taxes. And I also hope to see you if you have the opportunity at the next Saturday's Chainsaw Massacre. So if you are interested in playing this format, unfortunately it's not an MTGO or WotC supported format at this point, but a small group of players play it every weekend on Saturday, 15:30 or 3:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and you can register for this event on Gatherling.com. Very fun format, very very fun from a building standpoint and from a play standpoint. And I like to think generally some great people that are playing, friendly and generally helpful folks. So hope you enjoyed it, and take care.